Thanks ever so much for turning up. It's much appreciated. I know we've all got things to do. And can I also say thank you to Richard and to Dara personally for inviting me along, and to Sarah Jones, who's organised my trip and made everything very easy for me. So thanks, Sarah, wherever you are. On to the show. And I thought for my first trick I'd try a bit of mind reading, because I have a feeling that I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. You're looking at that screen and you're thinking, dear God, really? You're wondering if there's some way you can get to the bar without making too much of a scene. I hope that's what you're thinking, otherwise this is not going to work at all. And Darren Brown isn't going to lose any sleep over that trick, but it's kind of what I'm here to talk about tonight. Because this is why words matter. What you say and the way you say it really make all the difference. They determine whether your audience is going to engage with your work or drop you like a hot brick and head for the bar. So this isn't the title of my talk. And it's not the title of any talk I plan to give either. But if I was going to give this talk, I think you'd already know the kind of thing it's going to be. And you know that because of the words I've used. Not the literal words I've used, because they're not telling you directly that you're going to spend the next kind of half an hour or so trying to stay awake, or possibly trying to stay asleep. But indirectly, they're telling you all of that very clearly. And the point is that words always say more than they literally mean. They're treacherous things, words. They talk behind your back, they speak out of turn, and they whisper to the reader while you're trying to make your point. Like these words. They're whispering to you right now, and if I'd really written them, hoping to excite you about my talk, they'd already be ganging up against me and whispering to you guys and saying, this bloke's a total pompous bore, get out now while you still can. And how many brands, and dare I say it, how many design agencies often write words that ends up whispering the same sorts of things about them? This is really important for anyone who communicates with words, which of course is everybody. Your words always talk out of turn. They're kind of like the most outrageously indiscreet employees, but like employees, if you treat them with care and attention, they generally, even when they're whispering, will say positive things about you. And that's why clients hire people like me, because they want to make sure that they're saying what they really mean to say, which sounds kind of ridiculously simple, but it is true. And sometimes, of course, clients aren't even sure what they should be saying, but we'll come on to that a bit later on. The point is that words are subtle, complicated things, and they need to be handled with care. So let's get to the real title of this talk. Giving voice to ideas. This is actually the title that Richard very kindly cobbled together for me, and it's pretty much on the money. So anyone who feels like they want to walk out now should probably do so, because this is the real thing. No? Okay, good. I say this is the title, but I've also come up with a sort of alternative title, if you like, because as I was planning this talk, I did what you might expect, and I looked at the last one, which you may remember was from Matt Coyne, who I know well because we worked together on YouView, the TV platform, on the UI for that. I only got to see Matt's talk online, but it was terrific. But even so, it came with a bit of a sting in the tail, at least for me, because when you got to the Q&A at the end, the first question was a chap who said, I imagine working with a copywriter would be most designers' idea of hell. He said something else after that, but obviously I descended into a fog of despair by then and couldn't hear him through my own sobbing. But the question really made me think, why would any designer think it would be hell to work with a copywriter? So that gave me my second alternative title, which is Why Copywriters May Not Be the Unholy Agents of Beelzebub After All. I hope I can live up to that a bit. I've got a few case studies to show along the way, but not too many. I didn't want to subject you to a kind of slideshow of my work. If you do want to see that, you can always go to my company website, readwords.co.uk, which was designed by Thought Collective. Sam and Richard here did a cracking job of it, and I'm very pleased with it, so do go and have a look. But I thought I'd just start off just quickly by introducing myself properly. I'm a copywriter, obviously, and I have been in this business for 20 years, despite my boyish charm. And I'll give you just a very quick potted history because it's kind of relevant to what I want to say. So I started out in advertising. Back in 1993, I joined as a junior copywriter a recruitment advertising agency called Barker's in London. So I was basically writing job ads. It wasn't exactly BBH, but it was a good place to start, and recruitment is a real kind of boot camp for copywriters. It's a really good place to start because generally each job is given a job description, which might be 2 or 3 or 4 pages. You get some background on the client, and then you get a box kind of that big to put everything into. So you very quickly learn to be a ruthless editor of your own work, which is a very useful lesson for any writer to go through. After moving around in recruitment for a couple of agencies, I was approached by another copywriter, one of my original colleagues from Barker's, who wanted to set up a creative agency of our own. We were both pretty frustrated with recruitment, which can be a limited field creatively, and we wanted to do other stuff. So we set up in business and we called ourselves Other. And that little asterisk was actually part of our name, because we noticed that when you saw Other on a form, you had all these choices, and then you had Other, tended to have an asterisk at the end, and we liked the idea that we were doing something that wouldn't fit into the conventional boxes and that might lead in unexpected directions. And it kind of did. It kind of worked, because we got to work in all sorts of different areas of advertising and design. We did charity fundraising, sort of DM campaigns, poster campaigns. We made TV ads for Newsweek. We did naming, corporate identities, posters, a bit of everything, basically. And over the years, we grew to about 10 or 12 people, and I ended up creative director for a team of writers and art directors and designers, and learned, obviously, a huge amount. And one of the things I really learned was that I loved working with designers, and I loved graphic design. So when I left Other in 2002, which is a moment I'll gloss over if you don't mind, because I'll get a nice letter from a solicitor if I say too much. There were some spirited disagreements about the direction of the company, let's say that, and I decided to move on. So I've been freelance since then. I kind of went freelance by default because of that little moment, and what I realised was that I wanted to focus on the design world, especially. A lot of it was print back then, and I really loved working with print and still do. I love something you can hold in your hands and turn the pages and you can smell, all that stuff, something with some substance to it. And I really love the craft of graphic design on a very amateur basis, obviously, but I loved the way that designers can agonise about the spacing between a couple of letters. It sort of fits very well with writers who agonise for just as long about whether to put a comma after them. So I really enjoyed working with fellow craftsmen, or fellow anoraks, if you like. So the first thing I did when I went freelance was to mail shot all of the graphic design agencies in London that I really wanted to work with. That went pretty well. I got a couple of jobs and sort of went from there, really, and that's kind of the job I've been doing ever since. But what is that job? I wanted to talk a bit about what a copywriter is, what we do, what we're for. And the trouble is that a lot of people think a copywriter basically takes that and translates it into something like that, which is fine. And we all do that. All writers do that. It's good bread and butter stuff. And, don't not offer it to writers. But I think if that's all you get a copywriter to do, you're letting a lot of potential value go to waste. David Ogilvy, who was one of the most famous advertising writers, said very famously, "Those who think well write well." And it does kind of make sense. Anyone who can put together a coherent and compelling argument, which is what branding and marketing copy has to be, probably has a pretty serviceable brain, so you can get a lot more out of them than just grammatical sentences and good spelling. So I wanted to give you my kind of pet theory on copywriting, what it's all about, and actually all about what I think creative work is about in general. And I think what happens usually is that clients bring us facts, and it's our job to turn them into truth. Facts, if you like, are the raw material that we get. Every client has a certain amount of information, a certain set of facts that they want to get across. If it's a traditional ad, it might be something as simple as we have 10 organic oranges in every carton, or we fly to 100 destinations worldwide, something like that. When you get into branding, it might be a more complicated set of messages, more multifaceted, but essentially there's a set of information, a set of facts that they need to communicate to a certain audience. But facts, however powerful they are on their own, are never enough. If they were, we'd all be out of work. Clients could just put up a poster that's like that, and it'd be job done. No copywriting required, no particular design either, sorted. But clearly audiences don't work like that. For one thing, there's all the famous clutter that we always hear about, all these different dozens of messages coming at us all the time, we have to cut through that. But that's not really what I'm talking about. Even if there was no clutter around, a poster like this is clearly not going to engage or excite anybody or stick in their minds. Facts have to be turned into what I call meaningful truth. So what is truth? I just like putting that slide up. The truth in this context, for me, in copywriting, I think, comes down to basically the human element. If you like, the kind of emotional impact of work. This is what people tend to respond to most instinctively and most powerfully. In journalistic terms, we talk about human interest stories, and they're always the ones that tug at the heartstrings. They're always about personal disasters, personal triumphs, dogs trapped down wells, all that sort of thing. Emotional stories, basically. Emotional messages connect with us in a way that facts and statistics just can't on their own. If you ever needed evidence that facts aren't enough, you just have to look at cigarettes. There can't be a single smoker who doesn't know the most basic fact about cigarettes, which is that they will kill you. They write it on the box these days. These will kill you, these will give you cancer. It's there in front of you as a fact. But millions of people still spend lots of money buying cigarettes and smoke all the fags in the box. I know I used to. Even though we all understand the fact that they're lethally poisonous. We're just not rational creatures, or at least not entirely. Our heads tend to be ruled by our hearts a lot of the time. And I think the problem with facts, and the reason they don't connect, is that they're generic and abstract things. They're not personal. If I even tell you that so many million children die every year of starvation, we all understand the fact, we all understand that it's horrible, but it's still quite abstract. It's still difficult to kind of connect with. Whereas if I tell you the story of one child suffering, and I tell it in the right way, it'll break your heart in the way that statistics never can. We all know this because every charity appeal is based on that. It always tells real stories about real individuals. It's always supported by facts, but it leads with emotion, it leads with truth. Going back to the cigarettes, I found a really good little story in this book, Bad Science. Ben Goldacre, it's a great book, if you haven't read it, very funny, very interesting book. But he talks about a report into doctors who smoke. And you kind of think, well, we all understand smoking and the risks, so doctors must understand it more than anybody, and yet they still smoke. And we are irrational creatures. But the report that Goldacre talks about in the book shows that, I'll just read it out, doctors working in specialities like chest medicine and oncology, where they witness patients dying of lung cancer with their own eyes, were proportionately more likely to give up the cigarettes than their own colleagues in other specialties. And he says, being shielded from the emotional immediacy and drama of consequences matters. Emotional immediacy and drama. In other words, that's seeing what I call the truth over the facts, what they really mean for human beings, and that's what makes the difference. Emotional immediacy and drama. And these are the things that get through to people. And I like to suggest that the copywriter's job, if he or she is any good at all, is to find that emotional immediacy and that drama in a brief and bring it home. Of course, you can make information engaging and more interesting just by writing it in a nicer way or a warmer way or a friendlier way. And it's obviously very important to write in the voice of the brand. That's why this thing that everyone talks about, tone of voice, is very important. No one expects Friends of the Earth to talk like Barclays Bank or vice versa. And if the way you talk doesn't fit with your brand, then it can come off as kind of a bit weird at best, and at worst it sounds artificial or even misleading, like when banks do try to talk like charities. But that's kind of superficial. It's really important, and it's not easy. It takes craft and skill and all those things. But it's kind of the outer coating, if you like. And I think the real meat of a writer's work is getting under the skin of the brand and the audience and working out which messages in which form will bring the brand and the audience closer together in a way that usually helps the brand to sell whatever it is it's selling. And I guess that's what I mean by truth. It's writing that connects. So I've brought along just a couple of quick examples. This was the rebrand of the London Vision Clinic, which is a laser eye surgery in Harley Street in London. And it's founded by a chap called Dan Reinstein, who's an American surgeon, one of the pioneers of LASIK surgery, which is the most popular laser eye surgery sort of treatment, a real advocate for the treatment. And they had a very, very standard kind of medical brand. It looked very dry. It was kind of blue and Helvetica or something, very boring. The writing was also extremely technical, very factual. All the information you needed was there, but ironically enough, your eyes glazed over as you tried to read it. So they asked Hattrick in London to work on the new identity, and Hattrick got me in to work on the voice. And the first meeting I had with Dan Reinstein, I kind of had to arrive at 7 o'clock in the morning or some ungodly hour because he had to start his practice. But we sat down and talked about all this and what we were going to do. And I wore glasses at the time. And he said, what are you doing still wearing glasses? Why haven't you had laser surgery? And I explained, that lasers in the laser surgery kind of feels... That's what most people kind of think of when they start thinking about this stuff. And he said, exactly, this is the problem. People are terrified. Laser beams in your eyes, it's not a good thing. And he said, but the trouble is, actually, they're scared for no good reason. Actually, laser eye surgery is ridiculously safe. It's even less risky than wearing contact lenses, apparently. And that was the truth that we needed to get to on both sides. We needed to address the truth of people's fear and also the truth of the treatment and what it really meant. You know, to bring those two things together. And we did it partly with photography. So when we did the brochure, there was a kind of photographic essay of a day in the life of the clinic, following all the people through. And it kind of turned the generic abstract facts of, say, the surgeon into Dan. And he always wears these Pixar scrub hats. And so stuff like that just made him suddenly more human. He becomes Dan, he becomes a lot more approachable, and it helps to demystify the whole thing. So the photography was really important. And the copy aimed to do exactly the same thing. And the brochure that we wrote and the website we wrote is actually packed with facts, all about the technology they use, which is obviously the kind of highest, most advanced, amazing technology, the amazing battery of tests that they run on you and how those work, and the qualifications of the surgeons, all that stuff, because they wanted to inform patients, they wanted to make sure they understood everything that was going on. But we also wanted to cut to the truth of what people were feeling about laser eye surgery and that fear that they had. So we used kind of big copy statements in the brochure like this one. It's about trust. Your eyesight is one of the most precious gifts you possess, so who can you trust to look after it? That's the fundamental question for anyone considering laser eye surgery, which kind of tells the audience straight away, directly, we understand how you feel, we appreciate what might be going through your head, and we're here to address it. Or these pages, if you're considering laser eye surgery, you're probably a little nervous, which is not the kind of language that people expect from a kind of high-end medical clinic. The facts are the best reassurance. The better prepared you are for your treatment, the less you'll have to worry about. So what we're saying and the tone of it is hopefully very reassuring and kind of makes the patient think, well, okay, they understand, they know, they can see where I'm coming from. We could have just started the brochure. The London Vision Clinic was founded by Professor Dan Reinstein in 19 blah, blah, blah. He has all these qualifications and all that stuff, and he wouldn't have read past paragraph 2 probably. This stuff got people engaged. It told them that we understand you, and it connected with them. And actually, this was quite a dramatic example of discovering the truth of a proposition, because in that meeting, when he asked me about my glasses, he said, okay, you need to do this. You need to understand this properly. So I did it, and I went under the beam. And don't get me started on LASIK surgery. I'll talk to you for hours about what a wonder it is, especially from the London Vision Clinic. But understanding that truth from a direct point of view really did help me write it. It always does. You taste the drink before you write about it. Talking of drink, I thought I'd show you another example of a completely different sort of brand, a completely different sort of proposition. This is the Brink, which is a bar. It's a bar in Liverpool, a very unusual bar, especially for Liverpool, in that it's a dry bar. There's no alcohol at the Brink. And I worked on the identity with a little design agency called SB Studio in Liverpool, who also run the Cow & Co. design shop that you might have heard of. Actually, the thing about the Brink is it was set up by Action on Addiction, who are a charity that obviously help people who are overcoming alcoholism and various other dependencies. And they wanted to create somewhere that people could go. And if you were recovering alcoholic, for example, you could go there and there wouldn't be any temptation, and you could just sort of have a cup of coffee and have something to eat and whatever, socialize. And they knew their audience very well, and they understood what the audience wanted, and what they wanted was just to live a normal life, basically, and not be kind of ghettoized. So they wanted to give them somewhere real to go, not just a kind of drop-in center. They wanted to make it a real bar that was fun to go to and that looked cool and was a nice place that they might want to take their friends or their family, and they could just have all the stuff that everyone else has without the temptation of alcohol. So they said to us, we don't want any earnest charity stuff. We don't want to mention addictions. We don't want to do. It's going to be just a bar called the Brink, and it's fantastic. And that's all there is to it. And they wanted it to be friendly and a bit scouse. They wanted it to be cheeky and risque. And so I ended up writing these kind of slabs of rhythmic copy, all built around the idea that basically anyone and everyone comes or can come to the Brink. And there's a kind of subtext, I suppose, there that addiction can affect anybody, but we never mentioned that. We never made that a big deal. So this kind of Dockers, Shockers, Old Punk Rockers thing, they really loved, and they kind of picked up on it, and they used it on their bags and on their newspaper, which is called the Brinkley, which comes out regularly. And they even carved it into timber panels and put them kind of into the fabric of the bar. which was obviously fabulous for me. And the language became the real core of the brand, if you like. And around this kind of, these rhythmic little nuggets, we had lots of fun little labels and tags and stuff. So this was sandwiches, best thing in sliced bread. No fake breasts for the natural organic chicken. Scouse risque stuff. Serious bread, not much dough. So it was all just hopefully good fun. And they used, again, the people lines on the back of those tags. And then this was my sort of sum-up line for everything, which I was quite pleased with. So, Liverpool, a bit cheeky, a bit risque, all those things that they wanted. And crucially, kind of connecting with people by understanding that they didn't want to be told yet again that they were kind of a special group of addicts who needed a special place to go. They just set up the brink and said, come on. And it worked very well. Got ahead of myself. So, two very different projects, The Brink and London Vision Clinic. And both were pretty serious, sort of factual stuff underpinning them. But in both, we focused on the human understanding of the audience and finding a way to tap into the truth of the brands and the truth of the audience in a way that could best connect the two. And I think if you get that connection right, you don't just stand a chance of making a sale or whatever. You actually have an opportunity to build a relationship between the brand and the audience, and one that can go on, possibly for years, and become something really very valuable to a brand. It's almost the holy grail of branding, I suppose. And as I say, this is about a lot more than just tone of voice. It's much closer, in fact, to brand strategy, really, which is another reason that I think you're wasting a copywriter if you just get them to do the spelling and the grammar. Because a good writer, and especially an experienced writer, should have a good nose for which messages to focus on and how best to structure them, which is another reason to have a writer around early on in a project. And I'm not suggesting that these skills are unique to writers, because they're clearly not. But I think there's a lot we can contribute in the thinking and the strategy and the concept stages, as well as just the writing itself. Just as another example, I had a new client got in touch a few years ago now, but a small company who wanted to rebrand, and they were actually a digital design company. They were doing their own rebrand, and they said, we spent a long time working on our personality and our values and all that stuff. Will you come and help us express that in words? Which obviously I said, yes, fantastic. But when they sent me the brief, they said, this is our personality, these are the values we've worked out. And they were things like creative, friendly, passionate. Everyone knows these words. We've all seen them in 100 identity guidelines. And they'd done that classic thing of going round and round something so many times, trying to smooth out anything that might be a problem or might be objectionable or might be controversial. And they'd done that for so long that ended up with something very smooth and very inoffensive, but also something that was pretty bland. And the point of branding really is to differentiate, not to just become the same as anybody else. So they had a problem, but they'd kind of been over it and over it so many times and working on it for so long that they had got to the point where, as the Americans have it, they had to shit or get off the pot. So they settled on something they could all agree on, even if they knew it was a bit generic, they knew it was a bit kind of, okay, it's just all right. And that's what they gave to me, and it's a difficult one, because you think, well, do I just work with this, or do I challenge it? They've already spent a long time getting to this point. And I could obviously have just done the job based on what they had, and it would have been fine, it would have been okay, but it didn't really seem good enough. So I took the plunge and I told them that I thought it wasn't quite there, and maybe it was a bit generic and all these things. And they did kind of agree, so they knew it in the backs of their minds, they just didn't really want to keep having to have this conversation. But they did have one word on their list which kind of caught my eye, and that was exciting. And that seemed like quite a brave thing to claim, quite an unusual thing to claim, that you're exciting to work with. And I asked them about it, and they said actually this was the one word that they were nervous about including. They sort of wondered if they should, but they believed it. They totally sort of felt it was true, and actually their clients had told them it was true. So I kind of just said to them, well, let's talk about that a bit more, and we ended up having kind of half a day or a day, I can't remember, a bit of a workshop just saying, well, why are you exciting? Why do your clients think you're exciting? And it kind of opened up the whole thing again. And they suddenly, from being kind of a bit resigned and a bit subdued about this project, they got all excited about it again, and they kind of rediscovered what they were passionate about, without using that word. And we kind of completely changed their positioning, and it worked really well. The rebrand went very well. They even got compliments from their competitors after the relaunch. And I'm not saying, as I say, that copywriters are the only people who can do this sort of work. That's obviously not true. In many ways, all they really needed was someone to come in and kind of put fresh eyes on what they'd been spending far too long looking at themselves. But my point is this the kind of work that people traditionally think of as copywriting? And I don't think it is, which is why I don't really like even calling myself a copywriter anymore. Feels like a very small pigeonhole to be stuck in. In fact, I've ended up settling on creative writer for brands, which hopefully is not too pretentious. You could call yourself a verbal identity strategist or something like that. But some people might pay you some more money to be called that, but a lot of other people would probably write you off as a bit of a tosser. So I avoided that one. And that's what it says now on my website, and there's a little explanation of why I'll come to that. I said earlier on that I think this business of turning facts into truth is not just the preserve of copywriters. I think it's actually all creative work is doing the same thing. It's taking those facts and turning them into something that connects with the audience. And good design clearly does the same thing in different ways. Without some sort of emotional impact, design does feel pretty sterile. And I found a video recently of an interview with Michael Wolff, co-founder of Wolff Olins, of course. And he had this great quote where he said, "Emotion is probably the most important thing in graphic design. You don't just persuade people or make them think, or make people think, you move them," which kind of fitted with my theory very nicely. So I think we're doing the same thing with writers and designers. And that kind of brings me to the second part of the talk, which is that copywriter agent of Beelzebub thing. Because if writers and designers are doing the same thing, then, and namely turning the client's facts into a compelling truth, then the best way to do it is surely to work more closely together. And I think this is why that comment at the end of Matt's talk struck me so much. And I must be still very naive after 20 years, because it still shocked me that some designers might kind of actively avoid working with copywriters. I think that's partly because I started out in advertising, as I said, so the collaborative process is sort of in my blood. But it's not just a habit I picked up and can't shake off. I'm really convinced that creative collaboration really is the key to getting the best results. I've been working alongside designers and art directors all through those 20 years, and for me at least, nothing in the job is actually quite as much fun or quite as satisfying as that collaborative process. And I've said I think writers can bring a lot more to the party than a kind of obsession with apostrophes. And the way to extract all that extra value out of them is to bring them in early in a project and not as a bolt-on near the end. Because if you start together, you can build a properly integrated piece of work with design and writing working off each other, and properly interlaced and enriching each other at every point. I mean, advertising, of course, has done this for donkey's years, writers and art directors sitting down together, collaborating from the get-go. And it's not even at that point about who does words and who does design or pictures or whatever. It's just creative people solving a problem. And that's a process that I personally really love doing. Back when I was at the agency that I co-founded, we did a lot of work alongside a little design consultancy called Alter Ego, who became a sort of creative partner for us because we were only copywriters at the time. And one of the projects we did was for BAA, the British Airports Authority, who at the time were wanting to launch a car share scheme for everyone who worked at their airports. It was a real central plank of their, plank of their reducing emissions strategy, which was a big thing for them. They wanted to get 60,000 people, for instance, who worked at Heathrow in all the different shops and various resources to share their car journeys to and from work. And handily, they also happened to own 48-sheet poster sites around all the airports, so we got to do a 48-sheet campaign. And these were the ideas we came up with to kind of launch it. And as I say, I was on the team, I was creative partner, if you like, on the sort of concepts team. And you'll notice there are no words on these ideas. And that seems fine to me. There are a couple more words on these. My other cars are a Golf, a Rover, and a Fiesta. So I had a few more words on those, but basically they're real big visual ideas, no big headlines, nothing like that. It's a long time ago now, and I can't remember who came up with the original campaign idea or who came up with the individual executions, and that's kind of the point. It doesn't matter in the end. The ideas are what matters. And that classic advertising model of combining complementary skills is still the best way I know to develop really powerful ideas. Obviously, for that to work, you have to really respect your creative partner or partners. And you have to be not precious about protecting your little creative corner. If the poster's better without any words on it, don't put any words on it, even if you're a copywriter. Or if it's best just with words, don't stick a photograph on it. The work is what matters, not the creative egos at play. And that's why I find this idea that somebody said in that Q&A about writers sort of looking over a designer's shoulder really worrying, because it plays into this idea that a writer is this kind of terribly precious, pretentious type who's going to throw a fit as soon as anyone tries to change a semicolon or whatever. And then there may be copywriters like that, but if there are, I'm sure they are hell to work with, but I hope they're in a minority, really. And this principle of collaboration, I don't think, is limited to doing nice big poster ideas. Matt Coyne, when he was here before, spoke about YouView, which we worked together on, which is a completely different project. Just to remind you, anyone who doesn't know, YouView is this, what Matt called Freeview on steroids. So it's a new TV platform that combines Freeview with internet players, catch-up players like iPlayer and ITV Player and all those. And it's brilliant. I've got one at home. It's very good. I have to confess, when they first brought me into the job a few years ago now, I'd never really done any detailed UI work, apart from some fairly straightforward web copy. But that wasn't really the point. Matt and the team wanted to give YouView a kind of clear, human-friendly voice right from the start and integrate that through every point of the UI. So they kind of got me in when we were still looking at big pieces of paper with markers, just like you do on a poster campaign. So yeah, they could have got a writer in near the end to sort of polish up the more high-profile bits, but they asked me to come in and develop the whole product with them. And it was a really fascinating project for me, because it was completely unlike anything I'd done before. And even the sort of operational language was different. People were talking about stand-ups and agile, and there were people called scrum masters, and I thought I'd wandered into a kind of Dungeons and Dragons convention or something. So I had to get to grips with all that. And I was working with disciplines that I'd never worked with before. I was very used to working with art directors and graphic designers, but suddenly I was working with interaction designers and developers and product teams and all these people. And it was a huge learning curve, and I think it was probably quite a new experience for a lot of those people as well, working with a writer from such an early stage and at such a detailed level. But in essence, it was like solving the poster brief. It's creative problem solving. Each element of the UI we had to think through and go through that process of coming up with ideas, and sometimes the dev team would say that won't work because of this, and sometimes the interaction designers would say, well, no, that's not right because of X, and the product team wouldn't be happy, or sometimes I would say, well, those words don't make any sense, or they're a bit ambiguous, or whatever it is. But because you respect each other's skills and talents, you take that on board and you work it out together, and gradually each piece gets finessed and made as good as it can be. And it's faster and more efficient that way for a start. It's more agile, if you like. Because issues get raised and they get solved as you go along. No one's kind of hanging around waiting for a writer to turn up and throw the whole thing out. And it's also just better, because the visual and the copy elements, just like the visual and copy elements in a poster, or the interaction and the coding elements, all get developed in harmony. So you end up with a much more coherent and cohesive product at the end of it. And looking back, I really can't see how a copywriter could have done a proper job if they were brought in at the end of a project like that. It would have been kind of like building a house and laying the floors and putting the walls up and plastering everything and putting the furniture in and then getting a plumber in to do the waterworks. It just kind of wouldn't make sense. There wouldn't be much they could do. So, in summary, the copywriter's job, I think, is to turn facts into truth. As I say, a good writer is someone who can do a lot more, I hope, than make just proper sentences. We can make copy sound friendly or authoritative or chatty, all those things. Tone of voice does matter. But what really matters is getting the right messages structured in the right way for your audience. And that's all kind of word stuff. We can really help with that. And part two, as I say, collaboration is the key. We're not devils, I promise. Yes, we'll pick you up on commas and apostrophes and all that stuff, because we wouldn't be doing our jobs otherwise. But like I say, if we're any good at all, we'll contribute a lot more than that. And I should say, by the way, that we writers tend to love designers. I'm sure I'm not the only writer who works with designers and is constantly in awe of what you can do, whether it's beautiful typography or a lovely visual pun in a logo or a UI that just works beautifully and intuitively. We kind of sit in awe of that, and we love being part of it, and we love working with you. So let's work together some more. That's it. Thank you.
Hey, Mike. To what extent has working with words affected your appreciation or use of typography? The
typography?
The setting of type or the choosing of fonts.
Well, like I said, it's something I've always just really enjoyed working with typographers and designers, just the craft of type, I think it's fascinating at a very amateur level. And it is one of those moments where I just sit going, oh, you know, how wonderful to be able to do that. And I think any writer who doesn't take notice of typography is a fool, really, because that's what makes our words sing a lot more clearly and sharply than they would do on their own. So I've always had an appreciation for typography, and that's just grown through working with more and more different designers. And yeah, I love it. I don't know if that's an answer.
I work a lot with brands and development of brand identities for organisations. Do you think that most organisations who get a brand developed need a cleverly written strapline, a slogan?
Last time
or is it old hat?
It's not old hat, but I got exactly that question actually the last time I did anything like this. It's like anything else. I think if there's a need, then yes, and if there isn't, then no. And a lot of people, a lot of clients think they need a strapline. It's kind of one of those elements that, oh, we have to have one. And it's another one of those things that tends to get gone over and over and over until no one's offended by it because it doesn't actually mean anything anymore. So I think, like any other creative element, if it says something that's powerful and useful and not being repeated anywhere else, then fantastic. And it can be obviously an incredibly powerful element for a brand. I mean, Just Do It is kind of one of the most famous examples. But if it's just delivering innovative solutions, then forget it, because everyone says that. So there isn't a yes or no to that. It's certainly not old hat. There'll be someone will write a brilliant strapline tomorrow and it will be spot on. But I do think it's one of those things people think they ought to have, and half the time they don't really need one. My stalker. Welcome.
You're a writer, obviously. You write copy for brands and things like that. But I know that you're also a writer of fiction and
right.
film
exposing
and
that
type of
dirty
thing. Sorry, I shouldn't be telling everyone that one. How do you keep the passion going for all that kind of stuff? Because you obviously have to change the way you write for brands to how you write for novels and how you write, that type of thing. How do you keep that kind of the juices flowing?
I think the change is the key to that. The fact that you are changing modes, if you like. So, I do my noodling on the side, but it's kind of, a lot of designers do that too, right? You step out of the day job and you do this other thing that's basically still using all the same skills, but it's something you're personally wanting to get done. And I think that shift of, this is client work and this is personal work is enough to just refresh all the passion, to use that awful word, and get you going on a completely different track. So it kind of doesn't feel like doing more work. Writing a screenplay or something for myself is totally different. So it doesn't feel like the same thing somehow.
Mike, I just wondered if you'd share any thoughts you had on any changes you've witnessed in the last decade or so in terms of in the design world particularly, and on the sort of interest and emphasis on the words in the work that we do.
Well, there certainly has been a change. I wrote something for this about recently for Design Week, actually. But in the kind of 10 years-ish since I went freelance, it's changed quite dramatically. Certainly working in the kind of London-y area. When I started off, it was almost all of that kind of the stuff I talked about initially, with being given a brochure layout with a lot of lorem ipsum in and saying, "Can you just make that English, please?" And no one was that fussed in the end about what it said, as long as it was spelled properly and no one was going to complain. And you kind of think, okay, fine. And that's shifted a lot. You get a lot less of that and a lot more, thankfully, of the stuff where people are getting me in much, much earlier in the project. And as I say, using me as part of the creative team on a kind of equal footing to designers, art directors, whoever. It's working a lot better. And I think it's that strategy thing. Designers themselves are being asked to be strategists a lot more. So, and anyone that can help do that, I think they're more open to. It's a bit of a ramble, but it has changed a lot.
Hi, I'm Rob. I'm also a copywriter, so I'll declare a bit of an interest. You quoted David Ogilvy at one point. Obviously, he was a copywriter, but he set down in his books quite strict rules on how he thought design should work.
Right.
Such as not setting white font on black backgrounds and things like that. I just wondered how relevant you thought those still were from when he was working in the 60s.
How relevant the work is.
How relevant his sort of thoughts on design in today's world?
Well, you've got the advantage of me there because I don't know that much about his thoughts on design. But I'd be very wary about anyone sort of setting rules for design like that, because almost certainly the next brief you get in won't work that way. You know, it seems like a limiting way to look at anything really. To say, well, this is the way it should be done. It should be black type on a white background. It's kind of why. If it's right for the job, then yes. But if it's not, then no. Yeah, I mean, David Ogilvy knew a lot about writing. I don't know how much he knew about design. We may have known lots. I genuinely don't know. But that seems like a sort of dangerous thing to do to me.
As we live in the 140-character Twitter world now, do you think writing has got better or worse generally?
I don't know if those two things connect exactly. I mean, I know a lot of people think texting and all that is destroying writing. I don't think it is. I think if anything, it's probably getting better because people are getting better at the editing in order to fit into a tweet. I love Twitter. I think it's fantastic, and it's brilliant for writers, partly because it's fun, but also it's starting to generate quite a lot of work. You know, for us, suddenly there are whole channels full of words that people need filling. So commercially, it's great. And what I think, maybe it's the people I follow, but what I think is really interesting is that people often don't fall into the kind of text speak. I'm sure there are whole legions of teenagers who do exactly that, but almost everyone that I see on Twitter is writing basically in proper English, which fitting that into 140 characters is quite impressive, really. So I suspect that our skills are getting slightly better, actually, if anything.
You mentioned UI and difference in design. Do you deal differently with the likes of a website compared to a print? And have you noticed a change in that with the likes of media queries and responsive web design? Are you looking at that differently in how you write the words, and are they changing depending on the device and depending on the environment?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they do, because I think writing is always has to fit with the environment, whatever it is. And there are clearly, online, people read in a different way. We all know about scanning and attention spans and all that sort of thing. So, for example, you might break it up into much shorter, snappier little paragraphs than you might do in print, for example. So, yeah, it does affect it, but it's just another channel with its own little quirks that you need to channel through. I think it's like anything else. You only have so many words on a poster unless there's a very good reason, and that's the limitation about for that channel. And if you're writing for a website, it's going to be mainly seen on a phone, then there's only certain things you can do there, or actually certain things that are good that you can only do there, not just limitations. So yeah, you're always kind of conscious of parameters on any medium, I think.
Sorry, just in relation to that previous question, are you in the camp that says start with content first, or start with mobile first for content when you're writing for a site,
right,
or desktop first? I'm just wondering, there's this two philosophies that either as you get smaller, sometimes you end up suppressing some of the content for the mobile view, or are you of the mind that if it's not important enough to appear on mobile, it shouldn't be on the desktop version in the first place?
That's a really good question. I don't quite know the answer to it. I'm not sure I'm in a camp yet. And just because I just simply haven't decided, I haven't sort of thought about that enough. And working with UI designers and web designers is a key to that, because they'll obviously have their own views on what should be there or not there. And I honestly can't answer that properly, because I suspect again that it changes with projects. One project will be different from another. I suspect that the default should be that less is more, but it always is really. I can see value in having a mobile version and a desktop version, if you like, and the desktop tells you a lot more. So I'm not sure there's a camp that I want to sit in on that. I'd like to keep it open. I keep on saying that.
That's okay. I actually had another question before I heard the previous question. What sets you off into Beelzebub mode? There has to be something. There has to be something that gets you going.
Do you know what? I think it's probably anybody, but designers do this sometimes, changing the copy without asking me. That does annoy me. Because I did something the other day for a website, and I won't go into why, but he used the phrase "don a mask," and the designer thought it was a mistake, and he made it "don't wear a mask," which is actually the direct opposite of what I'd meant. And I didn't see this until it was on the screen, launched and live, and I went, "What have we done?" And I don't mind. I love the fact that designers are paying attention to the words, but I'd like to be asked before they just change them. Because I kind of thought, well, what would you do if I decided that typeface was crap and you should use a different one, and didn't tell you until the website went live? Most designers would jump out of their skins, presumably, quite rightly. So yeah, that probably is the one that bugs me. But I mean, clients do that too. They're much worse at it, in fact. But yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I can't see anything.
Right beside it. Just noticing a lot of things, a lot of design agencies at the minute, when they're talking about branding, they do these kind of bring the client in, bring everyone the client knows into a room, load of post-it notes, and they do the workshop it out. Almost, it strikes me as a little bit of, I guess, making sure that the client comes up with the solution so that there's a bit less, possibly, but it means that there's a bit less kind of friction when it comes to selling it back to them. And I was wondering, how involved do you get in that sort of process? Do you sit around with the clients and the design agencies, if you're working with that, or is there work in isolation?
A bit of both, to be honest. Again, depends on on a project. And I think you're right. A lot of the time, it's basically an arse covering strategy. Bring everyone in and say, well, this was your idea. We're just carrying on. So there's that, which is not very helpful. And I'm saying it again, but it does depend on the needs of a job. So I'll do naming jobs, for example, which is a big one, which can go from, I might literally sit on my own for 2 days because they've got a very small budget and they can only afford me for a couple of days just to think about it, and I'll just do a lot of names and we'll work something out from there. But naming is something you can take that all the way up to the other end, where you do kind of months of workshops, and like you say, everyone, the client and partners and research groups get dragged in, and it's an enormously complicated process. And I'm sure both of them have their pluses. I think the more and more complicated you get, probably the less value you get. And that's just a very broad brushstroke. But the fact that I can sit in very small groups and come up with, I like to think, as good a solution most of the time as those enormously complicated processes, is a bit of a telling truth, I think. But there's value in getting lots of opinions in. It's just that if everyone's sticking an oar in, the boat never goes anywhere.